You are listening to the Mary Jane Society podcast, where you will meet entrepreneurs, cultivators, scientists, doctors, and inventors in the cannabis industry.
Welcome. I'm your host, Pam Schmiel. Today on the Mary Jane Society, we're joined by Shane Johnson, a Stanford-trained medical doctor and accomplished biotech entrepreneur. Shane is the co-founder of BayMedica, a pioneering manufacturer of rare and minor cannabinoid ingredients known for their exceptional purity, consistency, and scalability traits critical to the future of pharmaceutical-grade cannabinoid products. BayMedica was acquired by InMed Pharmaceuticals, a NASDAQ-listed clinical-stage pharmaceutical company based in Canada. InMed is developing a robust pipeline of proprietary small molecule drug candidates that target the CB1 and CB2 receptors of the endocannabinoid system. Their current research program focuses on therapeutic treatments for Alzheimer's disease as well as ocular and dermatological conditions. I'm excited to dive into Shane's insights on cannabinoid drug development, the regulatory landscape, and the future of pharmaceutical innovation in cannabis.
So BayMedica's mission is to be the, trusted provider of high quality minor or rare cannabinoid ingredients, with a focus of delivering those, with high consistency, purity, and scalability. So we specifically focus on the production and distribution of rare cannabinoids at a commercial scale.
You synthesize these rare cannabinoids through a not chemical, but through yeast production?
We're process agnostic. So our focus on making these, and it can evolve over time, and certain cannabinoids may lend themselves to one process versus another, and some of it has to do with it. What scale do we need to produce these cannabinoids? So my two co-founders for BayMedica, both PhD chemists who are veterans, multi-decade veterans of the biotechnology industry. I met each other back in the late 1980s, I believe, at Chiron. One of them is a very gifted synthetic chemist. The other one is one of the pioneers in the area of genetic engineering of yeast, and so leveraging biosynthesis to make things. And so our approach has always been very agnostic as to we're using modern manufacturing techniques or precision manufacturing techniques that are commonplace in the biotech industry, but we're agnostic as to whether it's biosynthesis, chemical synthesis, a hybrid approach. We're also, partly because of regulatory considerations, we also in some cases have worked on hemp-derived material and using that as a starting point to do a conversion, or even building up supply chains around simple extraction and isolation, like you'd be familiar with, that a lot of people are doing today for CBD, for instance.
Oh, okay. So you would be open to working with a plant on like a medical grade.
Yeah, we're open to, like, we can take
Extracts.
we can take a starting material from the plant in many cases and use that to make another rare cannabinoid of interest. So there are lots of different tools that we can leverage, and again, we're pretty agnostic as to what we do. It's more about doing it at a high quality with consistency, and that it be a scalable process.
I mean, obviously it takes a lot of more plant material to get to a minor cannabinoid and make it worth it. So I understand, in the future with medicine, that's one of the problems, that why we would go to synthesis. But there's a lot of, naysayers out there about the synthetic.
There are, but I point out, like, the idea that a cannabinoid such as CBN, everybody talks about it being plant derived. Well, it is, but the plant's not making the CBN that is being utilized in all of these products out there. The plant makes CBD. People make an isolate, a CBD isolate, and then that CBD isolate is converted via a chemical process to CBN. high purity CBN. And we have examples of this throughout, the CPG industry, whether it's, vitamin A and D in my daughter's organic milk, whether it's citric acid that's used as a preservative for just about everything, whether it's caffeine in a Red Bull. There are lots and lots of examples of compounds that are part of most people's daily lives that are made via synthesis.
And do you have any thoughts or knowledge on, I ask a lot of people this and I don't feel like I'm getting a real definitive answer, the quality of hemp versus marijuana, like when you're trying to extract certain cannabinoids or, I mean, I know it's the same plant, but so maybe I'm answering my question, but I don't know why I feel like hemp, just my own gut feeling is that hemp is slightly inferior on the level of like entourage effect and things.
I think it's, yeah. I mean, I can't speak to the entourage effect specifically. I mean, obviously, by definition, and it's purely based on regulatory. By definition, hemp, is supposed to have less than 0.3% THC on a dry weight basis. So to the extent that THC is part of a part, if you asked about entourage effect, a part of the effect that you're getting, or seeking, then, quote unquote, marijuana is probably a better angle. If you're looking for something that absolutely doesn't, get you high at all, then, a hemp derived product is likely going to be better. And then you start getting into all of the nuances of what do the individual cannabinoids that make up that strain, what do they do? And how do they potentially even then interact with the terpenes and all of that? So again, I'm not an expert in plant-based material. I actually, one of the reasons I was interested in BayMedica is I had been doing some work with plant-based material, and I didn't like the variability that I saw batch to batch,
Ah,
um, and harvest to harvest. So I wanted to be able to, provide relatively high purity cannabinoids that could be combined in specific ratios. And this goes to things like, Dedi Meiri's work at the Technion Institute in Israel, where, he found that, okay, for this strain of cannabis that treats at least this cancer cell type, and granted in a petri dish, not in a human at that stage of his research, but he was able to do, basically isolate that it wasn't every single cannabinoid in that extract. It was only 3 or 4 of the cannabinoids in that extract that provided 95% of the benefit. So, you don't need every cannabinoid for, to necessarily create the desired entourage effect for a specific target.
yeah, I've actually interviewed Dedi Meiri also, and I'm familiar with his work, and I think he's also works with cultivators to try to get the exact um, profile of the different cannabinoids and terpenes.
Absolutely. And I think
Target.
you're seeing a lot of folks leveraging, again, modern techniques, but modifying the genes of the plant, modifying the genetics to help target the creation of a specific profile in the plant.
I mean, I think there's a world for both to live in if we end up, going down that route and can have strain specific medicine quality. But obviously synthetic seems exactly the way to go for what you were mentioning before for, you know, um,
Well, and
consistent.
scalability of things. I mean, you may find a plant profile that works really well for, it has 2 of the cannabinoids you want and it's in the plant profile, but something else like CBN, you're never going to get from that strain high CBN. So you would need to then add the CBN in, and that's going to be made via some sort of synthetic process. Most often in this case, because CBD is so inexpensive as a starting material, people make it via, starting with CBD and then chemically converting it to CBN.
So, what minor cannabinoids are you working with and why, and what are you doing with them?
Yeah, so the first cannabinoid we ever made and launched commercially was CBC, and I can that happened somewhat serendipitously. We were making a key precursor of cannabinoids in yeast and getting some pretty decent yields, and that's olivetolic acid, also found in the hemp plant or cannabis sativa plant. And then started playing around with the chemistry, and our chemist came back and said, "Hey, I believe I can make this more efficiently than what I'm seeing in the literature. Make CBC specifically more efficiently than what I'm seeing in the literature. Are we interested?" And I did a little bit more digging on CBC specifically, and the answer came back absolutely yes. Let's see what we can do here. And so over time, our manufacturing process has evolved for CBC, but that's kind of a core pillar of our at this point, founding DNA and commercial product portfolio. And CBD is very interesting for probably a variety of wellness applications, including potentially mood, inflammation. It also is thought to favorably modulate, or a lot of people believe it favorably modulates the high that one would get with THC. So a very interesting compound. We also make THCV, CBD, CBT, and CBL, and happy to speak to any of those if
Yeah.
you'd like detail.
Yeah, I would love to hear why, yeah, what their applications are. I mean, we keep hearing so much about THCV.
I
That
think that, and I think that's the one that we get the most inquiries about by far. Just when we get inbound, sales leads and things like that. So, look, there's some phase 2 human clinical data that was conducted by GW Pharma, now Jazz Pharmaceuticals, demonstrating that THCV can positively impact sugar metabolism. So, that has some
oh,
obvious potential benefits out there. And then there's a lot of other data suggesting that it may reduce appetite, which can potentially lead to weight loss, and also that it may, kind of support or enhance, energy and focus. So that's a cannabinoid that we think is poised for breakout this year. I mean, we've been thinking that for a couple of years, but really pretty convinced that this is the year for THCV. You're seeing a number of new products launch this year with THCV as part of the formulations. CBDV also commonly used in products supporting brain, immune, gut health. CBT, a lot less known about it, but may help stabilize formulations, and thought to help with moods and aches and pains. And CBL, we really know less about. We get some interesting anecdotal reports, but that's about it.
And so I don't want to jump ahead to your other company, InMed, who I guess you were telling me earlier, bought or acquired BayMedica, your
Correct.
company. So that'll be the research arm. So I would love to get into all that, in a little bit. But so you're selling these minors as isolates to a company that is creating a formulation, obviously. Who are these? Are they regular, just is it for the medical market? Is it for the rec market, just CPG products?
Correct. We sell these to ultimately the end users are companies either formulating products that they're putting into the market, or in some cases more R&D centric type of work. But we sell exclusively through distributors, so we're a little bit further removed from the full detail of who the end customers are. But I think it's clear that some of the products we make, depending on the regulated, state legal market, some of the products we make go into products in the regulated markets. Others go into the supplement nutraceutical market, more broadly CPG, beverage side of things. And then last but not least, we certainly have some interest in some of these some of the what I'll call nature identical cannabinoids that we make from some people working on pharmaceutical development, and their interest, they're looking for a source that could be scalable. So while we're not making it specifically for pharmaceuticals, at least for earlier stages of pharmaceutical development, there are people we're talking to about leveraging what we've done.
It's nice to hear that maybe some pharmaceutical companies or people are, doing some R&D in that, or just doing some R&D.
That's a long, slow process. I mean, it takes a lot of time, but
Which is
certainly of interest.
it's
And I think you're seeing more people doing what InMed is doing, which is moving away from focusing on the nature identical cannabinoids and focusing more on novel analogs or variations of these cannabinoids that are found, variations of the cannabinoids that are found in nature, and the variations that one can come up with makes them more eligible for developing a strong IP portfolio and things that matter
mm.
to the pharmaceutical world when you're taking 10 years and spending tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars to try to bring a drug all the way through to market.
So what do you call it? A nature?
Well, I kind of break cannabinoids down, and or at least the cannabinoids that we work with, into two big buckets. Nature identical cannabinoids, and those would be the cannabinoids we make that that we already talked about, that we sell to through distributors, that we sell commercially. So cannabichromene, THCV, CBDV, etc. Those are nature identical cannabinoids. We make the exact same compound that you find in the plant. Then you have another bucket, which are cannabinoid analogs, and these are compounds that are not found in nature. They may have a slight tweak to them, a different side chain, for instance, where they'll have a lot of similar activity to those that you find in nature, but maybe in certain areas are, an improved activity. So does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I thought I thought that's what you were saying. I wasn't quite sure. But so I guess then you've also seen through your distributor and obviously through sales where the trends are, going and who's interested in what. So is that what you're saying? Maybe that THCV is kind of a trending minor cannabinoid right now? And are you introducing these others that we were just talking about earlier that haven't been really talked about that much?
Well, I think that it all goes with, it's all starts with data. And then, from there, kind of the experience that you get and the feedback, whether, may start off with just focus groups and then ultimately be the consumers in the market. I mean, the ultimate data is somebody continuing to buy the same product and sales going up and they tell their friends, right? So, yes, THCV is what we see probably the most inbound inquiries about. Are probably the core of our product portfolio still remains CBC. It has been, I think is incorporated into a number of different products out there for its attributes. But if I just look at sheer interest, where we get the most inquiries for people wanting to learn more about it, that would be THCV.
One of the things that I've been curious about in the medical world is how much dosing does it require for these types of minors or even regular, like, when okay, to treat pain, to treat inflammation. Some people say, oh, it took my pain away, but I feel like, how much do you have to take? I've taken stuff and it's like I still have that pain. I don't know. You know what I mean?
I
Like,
think this goes to a variety of things. It goes to what cannabinoid, what receptors is it targeting, receptor or receptors, number one. Number two, are you a cannabis consumer to begin with? If so, maybe you've built up tolerance. That can change what is required. And then three, there's a lot of individual variability in terms of physiology. So I've used my
yeah,
mother as an example. She, if she drank a, half cup of a decaf coffee, in the evening, she'd be wired for several hours. I'll drink, a triple or quadruple cappuccino and it just puts me straight to sleep. So why is that? Where our genetics are 50% the same. So what drives those differences? And, from a simply receptorology perspective, a dose of THC, if you just look at edibles and beverages and things that are out there, for somebody who's call it a cannabis naive consumer, 5 milligrams might be plenty. And that's based on it primarily interacts at the CB1 receptor or binds to the CB1 receptor and activates it. Something like CBD, Epidiolex, these kids, so generally a kid weighs less than an adult, but kids, are taking grams of CBD, on a daily basis, for the treatment of seizures. Now there you're looking for, it's a different end result that you're looking for. And there, it's still very poorly understood what the mechanism of action is. So a lot of variability out there. So I can't give you a one size fits all answer as to
Yeah, yeah,
dose
yeah.
or size.
Does BayMedica have any plans of producing any of their own formulations or products, or is this strictly just to provide for other manufacturers?
I would say certainly not right now. I mean, we have a small team and we remain focused on doing what we do really well, which is to try to be a best-in-class ingredient supplier and partner to industry, rather than producing our own consumer-facing products. I think we're open to strategic collaboration. So maybe one of these days, we've talked to a few people here and there about something, but it requires a whole different focus. I mean, we're not experts in selling consumer packaged goods, whether that's direct to consumers or dealing with retail or any of that. So that would require hiring a bunch of new people who have that expertise, or again, potentially a strategic partnership.
And okay, yeah, I'd love to go on to InMed Pharmaceuticals and talk about the R&D clinical development arm of your company, and what's going on there. I guess what are you currently developing, and I guess what is the relationship? How long has it been since they acquired you? Why did they acquire you? What are their motives or mission goals, things like that?
Sure. So yeah, InMed bought BayMedica back in the fall of 2021. I think the motivation was twofold. One, we thought at the time that, commercial sales would be more, would ramp up faster. We thought we might get to some sort of regulatory clarity sooner. That hasn't really happened. So, our commercial sales are steady, but certainly the commercial business is self-sufficient, but it hasn't had the growth that we would like to see. Hopefully this coming year will be the breakout for that. And then the other primary reason that they were very interested in acquiring us is they historically have focused on the pharmaceutical development of cannabinoids, and they had been leveraging nature identical cannabinoids historically, and we started to work with them on providing some novel analogs for them to do some R&D, and ultimately that led to the acquisition. So right now, there are two lead programs. They are both at the preclinical stage, but their two lead programs are leveraging cannabinoid analogs that BayMedica made. The first of those programs is INM-089, and that is a CBN analog that is targeting macular degeneration. It basically the analog that they're working with demonstrated superior protection of the retina versus naturally occurring CBN in a preclinical models, or I think actually a couple different models. So that's one program. The other program is INM-901. That's a proprietary small molecule novel cannabinoid analog that is targeting Alzheimer's disease, and it's believed to work through a multifactorial kind of mechanism of action, and InMed is currently working to elucidate all of that. That's also in preclinical development right now.
Oh, wow. So is this like the first foray into cannabis medicine for InMed
No,
Pharmaceuticals?
they had already taken their lead program when they acquired us was targeting epidermolysis bullosa, and it was using CBN itself. And that's a very rare skin disorder that causes extremely painful blistering of the skin. And that program, when I say very rare, really challenging to get patients enrolled in a trial, given the rarity, and they were trying to do this during COVID, which made it harder because clinical trial sites would get shut down because somebody would get COVID, and so very challenging. And ultimately, they did complete a phase 2 clinical trial. There's some very interesting data around that, specifically around itch. So the specific formulation that they developed, has some very interesting, kind of anti-itch properties. And it may have other properties as well, but the data set was too small to really elucidate that. But anyhow, that program ultimately was taken up through phase 2. InMed has been looking for a partner for that program to take it further as you go through the phases of clinical development. Each phase gets more and more expensive. And if you're a small company, you typically look for a partner. But that was also, when they again acquired BayMedica and had made a decision to focus on novel analogs, in part because the intellectual property could be better protected.
Oh, right, because it's a tweak on the
Yeah, it's
nature,
not found in nature. If
not
if
found
if
in nature.
you if you're making a novel analog, and you can secure an IP position around that specific compound, then you effectively own the compound for the life of the patent, versus in the case of a naturally occurring cannabinoid, somebody else might develop a similar formula, and you can do method of use claims and other formulation claims, but somebody else could come up with something similar, and it's much harder to protect the investment that you've made.
Yeah, I've actually always wondered how that was going to end up working. So you answered that question that I've always kind of had in my mind. Yeah, how were they going to get IP on?
It worked very well for GW Pharma, and led to what was it, an $8 billion acquisition by Jazz Pharmaceuticals. So and that's just
CBD?
CBD, basically CBD, and I believe it's sesame oil. So not a very complex formulation, but they built a ringed fence of other IP. So and I think that's one of the reasons why people will now go out, people are looking at combinations of things or novel analogs, because, GW Pharma, for a series of compounds, developed as strong of an IP position as you could start to develop based on natural cannabinoids,
Yeah, wow. And
method
so
method of use, et cetera, right? So they have a lot of IP around method of use, method of, manufacturing, the formulation, all of that type of stuff.
right. And so you mentioned that they're a Canadian company. So I guess they're working with Health Canada to go
Uh,
through medical process, their
Yeah,
clinical.
InMed, I mean, so in the preclinical side of things, you don't necessarily, obviously you're doing things to, follow through with being fully regulatory compliant, but you're basically doing, working in preclinical models. So whether it's in vitro work outside of an animal, or in an animal model, you're really doing this early stage work that doesn't necessarily require any close interaction with the regulatory agencies. When the regulatory agencies really come into play is when you start moving into humans. And not shockingly, the United States and the FDA is really the kind of the paradigm for pharmaceutical development. So ultimately, InMed will be, if moving through with an IND, that would be working with, presumably, the decision hasn't been made. They could seek to do initial work elsewhere, but at some point the FDA would almost certainly be engaged. I mean, anybody who wants to enter the U.S. market has to go through the FDA. And since the U.S. is the biggest drug market in the world, most companies that are developing drugs, at some point focus on getting through the FDA process.
Really? So we're the biggest drug company or biggest drug manufacturer in the world, the US
We're the biggest drug market in the world.
market. Oh,
Um,
meaning we
and
consume
and
lots
and
of drugs.
and a lot of manufacturing is done here as well, but as well as Europe, as well as parts of Asia. So I mean, there's a global supply chain for a lot of drugs that are manufactured, but just when you look at the overall drug sales globally, you end up with, depending on the drug, typically 30 to 50%, if I'm not mistaken, of revenues for a drug come from the United States.
So I guess, yeah. So what are the most difficult scientific or logistical challenges in cannabinoid drug development in the regulatory landscape? I mean, we're kind of now talking about the FDA, but I mean, I know we're not legal, but if we were.
Say that in terms of scientific challenges, I mean, I think, probably, well, if you're focused on kind of naturally occurring cannabinoids, then there's a scarcity of if you want to do anything with a rare cannabinoid, there's a scarcity of material. You alluded to that earlier. It's one thing if I want to get CBD or THC from the plant. It's quite something else if I want to try to get CBN from the plant. It's again, it's not efficient. So that really limits access for research quantities as well as commercial scale, for ingredients, that somebody might want to work with. The other biggest issue is probably standardization and reproducibility, creating consistent pharmaceutical grade compounds. And that's, kind of our bread and butter, so to speak.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I've been really looking into the whole standardization for the whole industry, just that whole area that seems to be, and the
Well,
importance of
yeah.
it.
And it's a wild west. I mean, this is an area where, again, the industry hasn't necessarily helped itself. I mean, historically, if you're in a given state and you're making a THC product, well, if there's one lab that tends to give a higher number for THC concentration, they tend to get more business. It may not be accurate, and that so when you're talking about consistency, it goes all the way through, not just from the manufacturing side, and but people trying to game the system in terms of how things are tested, which then, how's a consumer supposed to have confidence that they're getting what they believe they're getting?
So I guess then kind of winding down, I guess I'm kind of just looking at this, as you know, this global landscape right now and how it's trying to get pieced together. And I'm trying to understand all the different regulatory bodies like the FDA, but then on the global level, in the UN and, all these kind of things. But maybe you just answered the question is like, how are we, how can we just keep building this to come together when we're finally able to legally?
I mean, from my perspective, if we're talking about the plant, at least, I mean, I think you mentioned it somewhere earlier in our conversation, but it's one plant. So this artificial distinction between marijuana and hemp it doesn't make any sense. We should be regulating, I don't know any other plant that is regulated, based on a relatively arbitrary, dividing point. It would make much more sense to regulate, for instance, based on how much THC is in it. Because that's clearly provides a differential effect of getting somebody high versus a lot of these other cannabinoids. So, one might be appropriate for even, younger people to take, and you don't need to have a specific license to make it and sell it. Something else should be more akin to alcohol and probably be, age gated serving size limits. But so far we just have I'm speaking specifically about the United States here. We have a mishmash. We don't have any good federal regulation. The federal regulation that we do have has, loopholes in it, and then it's left to the states to, either proactively or in many cases, reactively create new legislation, and that just leads to a patchwork that is very, very challenging to navigate.
Yeah, and the FDA has acknowledged and has said there are therapeutic benefits to the cannabis plant. So they've made their statement. So I guess we're just waiting for the DEA. But I know this conversation keeps getting beaten and beaten, but like, just what are your thoughts on that whole process, or the FDA? What do you have to say about the FDA as far as how they're handling us going forward with
Well, the
developing?
FDA isn't right now. They're basically saying we can't do this under the current framework. We need Congress or somebody else to act. And they're still even around CBD. I mean, people have tried to get a generally recognized as safe designation, which is what's required for food ingredients for some CBD based extracts and things like that. And the FDA has said, no, you can't do that. And this gets to the FDA, the way the FDA operates, which is they basically, in that specific instance, they're saying, nope, there's a precedent of CBD being used as a drug. And if it's a drug, it can't be in, you know, products that are widely accessible to consumers. It's a drug. So it really requires appropriate legislation. And I personally think that legislation, I mean, there continue to be some various things proposed, but I think that legislation should focus on, regulating it all, the entire market as one plant, and then go from there in terms of, how one might want to consider various components of the plant differently.
Right. So until we reschedule or deschedule, they're basically like, we're not doing anything. Is that kind of what
Yeah,
they're?
the FDA, or even when they have, again, when they have, people have gone to the FDA and tried to, go down a path where they would get and the FDA has come back and said, no, it's a pharmaceutical drug, and talking about CBD, we don't know enough about the safety profile, all of these things, which, potentially valid, right? There's a difference between using something as a food ingredient versus the same thing being a prescribed drug for the treatment of seizures. But nonetheless, there is no clean path right now today, absent, most likely Congress or possibly executive order saying, here's what you need to do.
Okay. So they do know it. They just aren't moving, right? I mean, the clear path is legalization. Is that right? Like
Well,
your Congress either has to step in and push the DEA aside and say, we're rescheduling or descheduling. And then the FDA
well,
say,
that'll even there, if it's just because something's legalized doesn't necessarily mean that all of the, that everything all of a sudden gets, seamless and worked out overnight. You still have all the state level regulations. You still have the FDA would still have to come up with how they were going to or not going to interface. And so part of this goes into what are the specifics of that legislation and how much detail does it go into? Is it a, kind of a throwaway, like in some cases, like the Farm Bill when legalizing hemp, where it basically, didn't have much of anything. I don't think that legislators probably necessarily knew what they were voting on either when they included language about, hemp being legal under the Farm Bill. But that leads to, again, a lack of definition and therefore a lack of responsibility.
I mean, lack of definition, there's over 30,000 PubMed research articles, on cannabis and its effects.
I'm saying a lack of definition in terms of, what,
Oh,
how this
guidelines.
should be regulated.
Okay, got it. Oh, wow. Okay. Anything else on the market or just any last thoughts at all?
No, I mean, I think you hit on
Everything that
a number of key points. I mean, I think that, if I was to, summarize anything, I'd say, we certainly see a growing interest in rare cannabinoids, and specifically because, while THC and CBD are both wonderful, they're only two out of over 100 cannabinoids in the plant. So it's not surprising that some of these other cannabinoids are going to have differential effects, especially when used in combination. And we believe that the future, for mainstream CPG really hasn't embraced cannabinoids yet, but when it does, it will be probably looking toward, very precise, if it's going to have more than a single cannabinoid in it, trying to create some sort of quote unquote entourage effect, it will probably be a very defined ratio, so for instance, a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio of whatever, three different cannabinoids, THC, CBD, and CBC, for the sake of argument, just because that's how you create the consistency of consumer experience. and when you're working with whole plant, it's harder to do that. So that's kind of what we're banking on in terms of the, trend as this moves towards more mainstream. That having access to these cannabinoids in highly pure forms with scalable manufacturing will be critical for the industry.
I haven't talked about this in a while, like synthetically made, and I haven't caught up on this area of the market. So, yeah,
Yeah,
this was.
and we generally, from a definitional perspective, I always, people always say, "Oh, you do synthetics." I'm like, no. I mean, when people use the term a synthetic cannabinoid, historically, people are meaning things like K2 and spice
I
that
know.
that don't resemble the cannabinoid molecules at all, but they happen to bind the CB1 receptor very tightly and therefore get you high as a kite.
Yeah.
But that's what I think of when I think of synthetic. So I like to say we make synthesized
Yeah. Okay.
nature
That's a better.
identical cannabinoids or synthesized phytocannabinoids being from the plant. So, we make synthesized phytocannabinoids.
That's a better way to say it. Yeah, because I feel like it's a trigger to people, to say that. Um,
Oh,
but
it
yeah,
absolutely is. I get into these discussions all the time with
I
people, and
know.
including people who it's like, we're and we've even had conversations, or I've had conversations with this, CEO of a company that's in the regulated cannabis market, and they're like, synthetics are bad, and they're thinking about THCO acetate and these other things that are coming in, that people are buying at the, corner convenience store, not having to go into a dispensary and purchasing. And it's basically they're like, hey, this is not fair. Like we paid all this money for licenses and we've got this robust system of, where everything's got to be metric compliant and all this. And here these synthetic cannabinoids are just, eating our lunch and they're bad, and I'm like, well, just let's be clear about what we're talking about here. So
Yeah, that's what I
because
wanted to.
not everything is bad just because it is synthesized. And again, back to some of the examples I used earlier, like caffeine in a Red Bull, synthesized. We'd have to grow so much more coffee and all this to, and then try to extract it. It would not work. So
I do have another question. So when in the drug discovery analog minor cannabinoids, does that make it harder to go down the regulatory path to get something approved in the FDA when you start manipulating
not really. I mean, so and
makes them
again,
more
like
confused?
a novel analog is basically a synthetic cannabinoid, just kind of carrying further from the definition that I just used. It's not a phytocannabinoid. It's not naturally occurring. But no, look, the regulatory process at the end of the day is basically the same. There might be certain aspects that you can skip with one that you need to do with the other, but you're basically going from preclinical data generation, pulling together a comprehensive enough data set around knowledge of the compound, what it does, safety profile, any impurities, and then you're pushing that forward through an IND or investigational new drug application, typically with the FDA, and then sequentially through phase one, phase two, phase three trials, hopefully all the way to approval. So that process is the same for anything that's going through, drug development.
Okay, because I think like there's, the government or the regulators are so confused by what, all these cannabinoids can do that I feel like if we're tweaking it a little and now we're going to just throw them into a tailspin. But I guess it's just regular synthesized drug
Yeah, it's
medicine.
just,
That's what
and
it's.
again, anything that you're taking down the drug path goes through one set of processes. If you want something to be available for use as an ingredient in consumer packaged goods, very different set of regulatory considerations. So,
Okay, okay, so
right,
it's.
and different expectations in terms of, what quantities might be used. If somebody's eating something, or it can be incorporated into multiple things that you would eat or drink, then you have to actually take that into account, that somebody might have 16 servings of something in a day if it's integrated into a number of different products. So you have to take that into account from a safety profile perspective. You also, if you're dealing with food ingredients, for instance, you're not selling a food ingredient for, hundreds of thousands of dollars a gram,
Right,
but
right, right.
pharmaceuticals, they often do. So whole different, and very different processes for different kind of end goals.
And I guess like what you're saying, it's really the end goal going through the end result as far as what you get on your clinical trials is probably what they're really looking at. Like this formulation treated this, was effective, blah, blah, blah. It's probably more what they're interested in than
Absolutely. Yeah.
breaking chemical.
Was it safe and did it work better than the standard of care? Those are
Yeah.
basically the two primary criteria that the FDA looks at.
Okay, great. Wow, this really helped me understand this whole world a little bit better. Okay. Wow, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Great to meet you. And
Thank you, Pam. Yeah.
yeah. No, and it's my thing to really just get the word out there about the science and what's going on. I think it's so important. Plus it's so interesting. But anyway, so yeah, so thank you so much. Great to meet you, and we'll be in touch.